It is an honor for me today to be joining you in this important gathering. Of course, we are united by a shared purpose to strengthen investment, accelerate economic transformation, and advance sustainable job creation in our own country. And I would want to remind you that at the heart of this mission lies a constitutional imperative. This year we are celebrating 30 years since the adoption of our constitution in South Africa. Now the work that I'm coming here to talk about is anchored under Section 22 of the Constitution. I'm tempted to say I'm not going to tell you what Section 22 talks about, so that you go and read about it, but if I do that, you may miss the context of everything that I'm about to say. Section 22 says, every citizen has the right to choose their trade, profession, or occupation freely, and that right may be regulated. For us, this is not a symbolic provision. It is an economic mandate. It places a responsibility on all of us as government, as business, and the society to ensure that this right is realized in practice and not for it to exist only as a clause in the Constitution. Because the freedom to choose a trade must also be the freedom to exercise that trade. There is an exercise of how we do trade, not only the freedom. And for that to happen, it requires an enabling environment, investments, infrastructure, access to markets, and a regulatory system that supports enterprise rather than constrains it. When we talk about an investment-friendly environment, it is important because that is anchored in the regulation. And Minister Tau in this country is the minister responsible to ensure that indeed that investment-friendly environment is created. We all know that our long-term strategy in terms of creating jobs, or the actual NDP, talks to South Africa having to create 11 million new jobs by 2030. And in those 11 million jobs, the NDP says that 85 to 90% of those jobs will come from small enterprises. It's not me saying that, it is the NDP. The same NDP commits us to eliminating poverty, reducing inequality, and building a more inclusive economy. And that, again, will never happen if it is not anchored under the development of the small enterprises. This that we stated in the NDP is not an aspiration, it is a national imperative that must guide every decision we take. If we are talking about investment in hydrogen, where do we locate the MSMEs and cooperatives? If we are going to put a policy, where do we locate MSMEs and cooperatives? So in every decision that we make, we've got to make sure that we put at the center the benefit for MSMEs and cooperatives, because they are the ones that are going to create the sustainable jobs that we so need. And if we are serious about achieving that, it means we must be deliberate about how to use the investment that keeps flowing in our respective areas. Because for us, investment is not an end to itself. It is the instrument through which we can create the jobs, as I've said, and not all investments create jobs. Not all investments create jobs. And not all jobs created will be sustainable. Now we need to find instruments of ensuring that we build sustainable jobs. But also when we attract investments, we also make sure that there are instruments that we put in place that must enable us to be able to create the sustainable jobs that we're talking about. We're not doing very well as the province. I've shared our impact report with the MSC. There's poor uptake of the products that are flowing into this province, products that are meant to assist entrepreneurs access finance, access markets, and of course to reindustrialize. Because as the Premier had articulated Just by nature around yourselves, you've got great potential, but how do we leverage what you have in order to make sure that the entrepreneurs, they benefit? And if we are serious about meeting the targets that I spoke about on employment, we must grow the contribution to at least 80%. And as things stand, we are only at 60%. And this is not an option, MEC, Premier, and everyone that is here. It is a necessity. The Premier earlier on in the briefing made reference to the number of jobs that have been created since 2018, and therefore the numbers they would want to create by 2030, which talks to 60,000. Now, if you are to create the 60,000 jobs that the Premier says is the target for the province, it means that 85 to 90% of those are going to come from small enterprises. Therefore, what is it that you must do differently from now to make sure that that target is realized? And that target talks to not less than 50,000 jobs that must be created from the entrepreneurs, which means everyone else will be contributing about 10,000 jobs that are there. And this is why we had said as the portfolio, it's important that we join this important gathering, so as to conscientize but also remind all those that will be pledging their investments here, but also those that will be receiving and those that must ensure that we work together from national to local to give effect to what we would want to achieve. Utilizing, of course, the legislative prescripts, government has passed, President has signed the Public Procurement Act, which also gives effect to how do we utilize public procurement in order to position small enterprises. Because it's not only through the investments that are coming, but also the access to markets in terms of how government procures, just like we will talk to the ESG component of those that are big corporates. And these are all tools that will take us to where we want to be. Minister Parks spoke about the global environment that we're operating in, which is a reality that is hugely felt mostly at smaller level, because big corporates are able to cushion themselves through investments that they make, whether it's insurance and many other things. But for the smaller guys, it's very difficult to have themselves cushioned, which is why we're working closely with DTIC to make sure that we create some incentives that must cushion the smaller guys so that those jobs that they've created remain sustainable to what we would want to achieve. Of course, we're here for the Northern Cape Investment Conference, but again, I want to take you back to Section 22 of the Constitution. We are open for investment, as the Minister said, but not only investment, we're also open for partnerships. As we welcome the FDI across infrastructure, energy, and the other sectors that the Minister has spoken about, we also take responsibility from our side to say, we're certain that we will meet you investors halfway by making sure that the entrepreneurs that we are going to contract and subcontract, they are ready in terms of the equipment that they may need, but also the access to funding for them to be able to carry out the task that you're going to give to them. We will be working with the MEC again to define a clear niche in terms of the investments that are being left here, to say where are our enterprises going to participate in the value chain of the investments and the other potential, economic potential areas that are here. Because most of the time we miss it by wanting to impose on what is available for entrepreneurs without checking their readiness, whether it's funding readiness or it's market readiness. And this is why we are saying we are looking forward to increasing support in terms of the funding readiness, the technical assistance that must be provided to the entrepreneurs of this province, but also to increase access to funding. Minister Parks, we had set 200 million rands on financial support to this province, and only 60 million rands was utilized. On business development support, we did very well, about 130 million rands. But if entrepreneurs from this province are not able to access funding, it tells you that there's going to be a challenge in terms of the transformation and the inclusivity that we want to see in growing the economy. That's why we need to change how we do things, and that's why we're also calling for partnerships in order to make sure that we improve the quality of deals that come out of this province, so that when we're saying in the agricultural space we're working together on agro-processing, this is what we must do. And there will be the capability to access the funds. We know this is the story. I know Minister Ramokgopa also goes through the same as I listen to National Treasury. It is because there's a gap in terms of making our entrepreneurs to be funding ready. And this is the work that we must do collectively. It means if you are saying there are opportunities, you've got to talk to us clearly about the opportunities, and therefore we assist the entrepreneurs to be ready to tap into opportunities, whilst you're also making sure that you adhere to the legislations of our own country. That's why I quote Section 22, because those rights may be regulated. And this is when we begin to put some legal prescripts to give effect on the regulation that must enable access by small businesses. Tomorrow, the 15th and the 16th, we'll be hosting a local economic development summit, which will be addressed by President Ramaphosa. This is a partnership between ourselves as the portfolio, DTIC, SALGA, and COCTA. Why it is important for us to do that? Because there's a gap in terms of the interventions, including the regulations that are imposed. I'm going to make an example, as Minister Parks was saying on the triple Ds, there's the digital aspect of it. We would want to put data centers, we would want connectivity and this and that. But then when you go to a municipality as an investor that has been approved at national level, it's a different case for you to access waivers, because of the regulations of the municipality, whether we're talking about licensing and many other things. This tells you that there's a need for a creation of synergy or a framework that must be understood by everyone to say, for these investments to yield the desired results, they need all of us to work together. So, mine is here to talk to create investments that must create sustainable jobs. And I told you how you will create jobs, because without including MSMEs to participate meaningfully and effectively, we're not going to be able to achieve that. We've spent less, as I've said, but also in relation to the uptake Premier and MCE, there's different districts, and you would look at others, they are dominant in getting the money that I spoke about, others they don't exist at all. This again talks to the need for collaboration from local level, business and to national level. We have different instruments that we provide: the Informal Micro and Enterprise Development Program, which is known as IMEDP, the Asset Assist, which provides equipment to entrepreneurs, of course for cooperatives, because we also believe in collective entrepreneurship, which is the cooperatives. We provide support, non-financial, in terms of equipment, business development support, and any other support that they need that goes up to 5 million rands. I'm citing this because these are early enablers for the small businesses that are here. Premier was telling us of great investment that was made, MSMEs that were celebrating yesterday here, reaching deals, but they may not be able to stay on the job if they're not able to get the support that they need. And they also need the markets, and the markets are not in China only. The markets are here in South Africa too, here in the Northern Cape, because people tend to undermine domestic investment and only want to focus on foreign direct investment. This is why we are saying investors that come and invest here, they must not live with raw products. And that's why we're stepping in through the interventions that we make of the small scale manufacturing support, working with DTIC, NEF, and IEDC, and the province and the municipalities to say which infrastructure is underutilized. What is it that we need to do in order to give effect to the factories that must be opened here? Because factories must be opened here in order to create the jobs, but also to make sure that we promote and support local economic development, which is another policy of government enshrined in the same constitution that we're talking about. And for that to happen, it means we must have an active business sector that takes interest in the development of the law, and a government that is responsive to what their citizens and their investors need. Last month we were here, we launched the Northern Cape Agricultural Incubator. Again, we're looking at promoting or providing light manufacturing and the processing. And this is work that helps us to say, we're taking these farmers that are being incubated when they are ready to go and trade outside the country. And there's lots of them that the MEC was reporting about that, to say we are now accessing international markets through the interventions by DTIC and our Small Business Enterprise Export Program. So, as we'll be inviting a panel here, because I am leading a panel, program director, I was just opening up to say what is it that we must look at, so that the panelists, as they come here, they respond to specific things that provide clear direction on what is it that we must do. Because for us, it's not only about stating what we do, because clearly what we are doing has not yielded the results that we would want to see, which is why we must also converse with other stakeholders and not only ask questions. As the panelists will be invited here, the question to ensure that Northern Cape really moves from the theories, from the pledges here to practicality is, how do we translate this opportunity into investment that is bankable, scalable, and inclusive? And that's the question that must be answered. How do we ensure that investment does not remain concentrated, but becomes catalytic across communities, so that there's not over-concentration in one district, but other regions are able to come to the party by providing what may not be provided in another district in order to enable everyone? How do we ensure that every investment we mobilize contributes directly to creation of sustainable jobs? And Program Director, I look forward to a robust and solutions-oriented discussion, one that must move us from policy, theory, and implementation, from intention to impact, and of course, from potential to shared prosperity.